When I show you this shot, you're thinking, wow, that puddle must be very deep, except that's not what you're thinking because you read the title and you know it's a 3D puddle. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a 3D puddle that looks realistic, at least in my eyes, and it's something that we can actually control procedurally and choose like the size of the puddle, its reflectivity, how much of it is wet, and how much of it's just like darkened asphalt. Either way, let me show you how to do this. So pretty much the only preparation you're going to need to do for this shot, assuming that you're using real footage, is you're going to need a motion track your shot. So you can see here the camera's moving and everything looks correct. I use Synthesize to do this tracking, but I've done a bunch of tutorials on how to track this with Blender. But you could just watch this as a puddle tutorial. And by the way, once you have your camera tracked, what we're going to do is basically make a procedural puddle that like works with the view angle and all this. You can see it's reflective when we look at it this way, but then when we look top down, it gets kind of transparent, which is how puddles behave. Either way, let's get started. So I think I should have reverted the save. There we go. So basically all I have is the shot motion tracked, and that's what we have. So just a couple things to make sure we're ready to get started. I'm going to make sure my background's fully opaque so we can actually see it. I'm going to make sure the background is transparent so that, you know, when I look here, there's not going to be a bunch of stuff in a rendered view. So transparent. And then finally, in color management, I'm going to set this to standard, which is just going to make sure everything looks correct. Don't worry about that. But now let's make a puddle. So step one, you're going to add in a plane where you want your puddle. I want my puddle to be here. So here's where the plane is going to be. Once you've selected your position for the puddle, we need to make the material for it. So yes, this is a completely, as I said, I keep saying it, but it's a completely procedural effect that we control via the material. So here's how we make it. Long story short, we're going to make a circle, we're going to distort it, and we're going to make it reflective. To do that, I'm going to start off with the material, make it blank, and let's start off by making our circle. Fastest way to do that, you take texture coordinates. I'm going to use object coordinates because I don't know. It's just the one I use. It's centered on the middle, which is helpful for making a circle. By the way, all this stuff, node preview. I'm tired of explaining it. It's an add-on. Link in the description. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this texture coordinate system and pass it through a distance function. Not a dot product, but a distance function, which is going to output the distance from the center, which we can actually move, which is a radial gradient. You take this and we filter it through some kind of process that looks at its radius or the distance that this is outputting, like a subtraction. And you can see now we have a circle we can control. In fact, we probably just want to flip that, and now we have a circle we want to control. Look at that. So again, radial function, comparing function, we're good to go. Next question. We have a circle that's tracked on. How do we make it look more puddly instead of circly? A good question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to distort this with randomness. In other words, noise texture. So whenever you want to add in a bit of, you know, a little oomph, a little chutzpah, a little whatever, you just add in some randomness. So I'm going to use the same coordinate system that we used for everything else. So object coordinates for everything. So I'm going to be using this noise texture, and all we need to do is mix these two together. So I'm taking my original texture coordinates and just adding in some randomness, which, by the way, you want to set to linear light, because you're going to see as we do this, it's working, but the center of it's kind of drifting off to the side. Long story short, for a reason that I'm also tired of explaining, linear light keeps it centered. So it adds distortion, but everything stays in the middle. So you can see now we're getting more of the shape of a puddle. We can control the contribution of this noise, and also, more importantly, we can control the quality of this noise. So I want it to be very detailed. This is the kind of thing that's better seen up close. So you can see we have a pretty rough boundary. I'm going to add some detail to that boundary. It's dependent on the kind of puddle you're going for. I know technically there's one kind of puddle, and there's no artistic whatever. I don't give a fuck, okay? This is what we're doing. We're adding some detail. You can also mess with the scale of it, so how like dense is this detail? I'm going to go for something like that. And finally, one thing that I found looks pretty good is you want to add in a bit of roughness, which adds a bit of scattering. But if you think about it as wet asphalt in the puddle, it's going to have tiny pieces that are wet. And it's going to be a bit chaotic, so I just like to increase this roughness to, let's say, 0.75. Beautiful. So now we have a puddly looking thing, and now we want it to behave like one. So we've made the mask, and now we just need to use this mask in our BSDF. So principled BSDF, just a BSDF. First thing I want to do is make it transparent in some areas, so it should be visible wherever there's a puddle and invisible wherever there's not. So take this mask that we created and connect it to the alpha. That does exactly that. It's a little hard to tell, but it's a little opaque in the middle. To make it more intense, you could either go with the multiplication route, which is where you take this and then multiply it by a big number to make it like very visible. What I prefer, and that works, it's fine. What I prefer is a bit more control. So I'm going to use a color ramp where we're going to take our mask and make it just a bit sharper, as you can see like that. And then the closer these two get to each other, the more opaque this looks. Okay, but the nice thing about this is we do want there to be a bit of fall off because the main puddle is going to be here and there should be a tiny bit of like a wet rim around it. Beautiful. Base color, I'm going to make it a dark color, and now let's make it reflective. So no roughness. It should be shiny. Metallic. I don't know if this is correct, but it looks good when I do it. And now this is a reflective thing. Of course, it kind of looks weird, but that's because there's nothing for it to reflect. So what we need is an HDRI environment, something for this puddle to reflect. Ideally, you actually take one in your scene. I'm just going to find one that looks similar to the day that I filmed on. So environment texture, we're going to add an HDRI environment. So again, I'm adding a sphere map for the reflection to actually, for there to be something to reflect. So I'm looking for kind of like a gloomy, sad day. So sad. So abandoned slipway looks good. Urban streetway looks good. We could try a bunch of these. Either way, let's try this one to begin with. You can see now we actually have something that it can reflect, but more impressively, the reflection actually kind of moves correctly relative to the camera, because of course it would. We did a camera track. I'm just going to try the other one, because I think the other one's what I used. Yeah, that looks even more accurate to my scene. Only thing with this one, though, is because, and I'll disable transparent for a second, because there's all these buildings and stuff, we're going to have to like reorient our HDRI so it's not reflecting in the puddle, since I don't want it there. So in the world tab, this is where our HDRI lives. I'm just going to mess with the coordinate system. So just rotate it. That almost solved it. And add a bit of X rotation. That might have solved it. Let's see. Yeah. There we go. Oh, no. There's some trees. Keep rotating it until there's nothing visible. Okay, that looks good. So now we have something for it to reflect, and now, long story short, we need to hone the look. So the physics, not the physics, the idea, the theory, it's correct. It just looks like fucking garbage. Today, I fucking weigh myself. I'm trying to gain weight. I'm trying to bulk. I'm 155.6, fine. And every day I do it in the morning. So it's consistent. I go to take a shit. Fine. I then go to weigh myself again because I'm curious, do I weigh less? Again, 155.6, so somehow I took a phantom poop, or I misread the number, or the scale's broken. Just a little bit of a story. Okay, so the puddle, we need to make it look better. First thing we can do is, at no point should this thing be like entirely opaque. I still want to see the ground underneath it, and that's what's going to sell this effect a little. So the thing going to the alpha, I know that was a random tangent, but the thing that goes to the alpha, we can control this white handle, which is its maximum opacity, and the closer it's to white, the more, opaque it is. Long story short, instead of 1, I'm going to keep this around 0.9, just so it's barely visible. You can kind of see through it. I think that helps a bit. But another thing is we're going to add in some Fresnel, which is, what Fresnel is it basically outputs the view angle relative to the camera. So if you look at this plane, it looks like this. But as we look towards it, it becomes more and more black, more and more white, more and more black. And this is useful because when we look at a puddle like this way, if you actually just look at the ocean or whatever, it's most reflective when you look at it kind of parallel. And when you look on top of it, you can actually see through it. So we're going to include this effect into our effect. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take everything we did with the alpha. I'm going to take this, I'm going to multiply it by this Fresnel. So now this Fresnel is actually affecting it, so you can see very transparent. But as we go over here, it becomes more and more reflective. It's going to look more like a puddle. Although the effect does seem to be a bit too strong. Take the Fresnel, multiply it. So here's our Fresnel gradient. The more we multiply it, the more white it's going to look. So I'm just going to cheat a little, pick a number that looks good. So 2's not enough, 3's not enough. By the way, we can clamp that. 4, okay, that's pretty good. So you can see it's pretty reflective, and then as we get close, it becomes pretty transparent. That's good. It's still like way too, it's too intense in the sense that I don't want to actually be able to see through the puddle. It's affecting it too much. So I'm just going to add in a tiny bit of something before. In other words, where the Fresnel is 0 is where the issue is. So I'm just going to bump it up a tiny bit. It's like 0.2, maybe 0.15. There we go. So let's see. Reflective, and then as we get closer, you can kind of see through it a bit more. That looks good. We can modify it a bit. At this point, it's really just a dance of like messing around with the colors and all that. And by the way, the reason I make it metallic, maybe it doesn't matter. I was going to say the reason I make it metallic Because it gives it the correct kind of look. I guess it doesn't matter too much. Maybe I won't make it metallic. So yeah, the rest of this game is kind of honing in the look, but one thing I just wanted to specify or just make it very clear, everything we did here is procedural. We made a circle, we distorted it, whatever. That means we can like procedurally make the puddle bigger and smaller, and that's cool. And we can also mess with the, the shape of it and how distorted it is. Yeah, there we go. Adding in a bit of distortion is what makes this look random. So let me just show this. Yeah. You want to break up that pattern a little bit. So that looks pretty good. I'm thinking so again, we're adding in tiny details here. I think another thing I can do to make this look more realistic is I've set it up so that, this thing is transparent relative to this equation we made with Fresnel and all this. But the roughness, how shiny it is set to 0 everywhere. And what it should be is it should be very reflective in the middle. And then as we get to the boundaries, a little more rough, it should be. So let's like simulate that. So I'm going to plug in the mask here. We want to invert this so that the center is black. So I'm just flipping these handles. So the roughness is very close to 0 in the middle. Then as we go towards the rim, it gets more and more rough. I think if we were to plug this in to our roughness, it should give us a bit more of a realistic look. So before, after, it's subtle, but it might work. That looks pretty good. Some other things we can do to increase the look of this is we could like literally make a 3D model of our ground so that it actually, I don't know what the word is, it distorts light and all that. Like right now, this is just an overlay that we're going to put on top of it, which is the way I'm going to do it because it gets us 90% of the way there. But I could do it more intensely. I don't know. Let me just mess around with these numbers a bit more. I want my Fresnel to be a bit more intense. But I think this does look pretty realistic. I want to make sure the metallicness. I can't tell if it does anything, to be honest with you. But I am going to make the base, basically the closer this is to black, the more like just shiny it will look. So I'm trying to find a good balance. I mean, ideally you want it to be roughly the color of the asphalt, maybe a tiny bit blue. But I think this is like pretty good. I think if somebody wasn't looking for this puddle, they'd be like, oh, there's a puddle. And the nice thing about it is we can reposition it and rotate it and just get like new puddle scenarios, whatever that means. I don't know. We could take this further, but I think this is like 90% of the effect. And like the rest of it is like literally, and I'll talk about what I was saying. You literally make a ground plane slightly beneath this. And then what you do for this is you'd, and we're off the rails now. This wasn't planned. But what you do is you load in the sequence, assuming you already did a track and everything. And you want to set this to all these settings. Make sure it's using windowed coordinates so you can actually see through it. So now we actually have a ground plane beneath this. I'm going to set it to clip. And what this can do is it lets you actually like reflect stuff, and it's a 3D layer that can interact. And especially if you set this to like this, it will, whatever. That might be a bit overkill though. But we do now have a very realistic looking puddle. I'm just going to get rid of that. So we've made the puddle. If you want to composite this on top, you can either render this as a transparent pass, or even better, just do your compositing right in here. So what I'm going to do is, this is our render layer. We can't see anything because we haven't rendered anything. So maybe let's render one frame here. Although I don't know if I've loaded my render kernels. Let's hope that I did. Okay, that looks good. It's a very fast render. So there's our puddle. You can see it's in the render layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay this on top of the original footage. So find the original footage, sequence, beautiful. Set this to alpha over. I'm so over this tutorial. Something like that. So now we have one on top of the other. But the nice thing about doing compositing right in Blender is we can like mess around with the gamma and like get the look we're going for. Because I feel like gamma is like one of those sliders that's really going to make or break this. So let's pick a frame that's closer, re-render it. So now we're looking much closer to it. And you can mess with the gamma, the saturation, whatever. But we made a puddle, so I think that should be the end of the tutorial. And okay, we made it to the end. I just want to mention, because that's what I do here, Patreon, it exists. You can get the blend file for the puddle procedural thing, so you don't have to make it yourself. You can just have a puddle asset. But there's a lot of reasons to join Patreon. I can never say it. There's a reason that 700, almost 80 people are part of it. So you get the blend files, anything I've uploaded over the last 2 or 3 years. You get early access to tutorials. This tutorial you could have watched early instead of, waiting for it to come out normally like a schmuck. Also, early access, not early, I already said that. Exclusive tutorials that only exist on the Patreon. I uploaded one a couple days ago about how to make a bunch of shapes procedurally, just going through them all. Circle, ellipse, metaballs, torus, just even things I haven't covered before. All of that exists on Patreon. Check it out. There's a link in the description. It would help me out, but also it might help you out if you're looking for those benefits or you just want to help a brother out. Either way, Blender tutorial's over. I'm out of here. See ya.